Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I guess we can go ahead and get started with some introductions. More people are probably going to be trickling in as time progresses. My name is Nicole Dojero. I'm a solution engineer at LaunchDarkly. And here, one of our customers from Thrivent, I have Aaron. Aaron, you want to introduce yourself?
Gladly, yes. So my name is Aaron Ader. I'm a staff software engineer at Thrivent, and we are a LaunchDarkly customer. And I'm here to give a little bit of perspective about, how we're leveraging the platform.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining today, Aaron. So just a quick overview over what we want to cover today. So I want to spend a few minutes kind of setting the stage and making sure that we're all on the same page about what LaunchDarkly is and what we offer. Then I'm going to pass the mic over to Aaron so that he can jump in and actually talk about some ways that Thrivent has leveraged LaunchDarkly to improve their release management processes. And then I'll jump in and actually show a little demo on how that actually looks within the dashboard and how we accomplish some of those things. But that being said, I would just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So on the actual platform yourself, you should see 3 tabs there. We've got a little chat going where we've got some introductions already underway. So feel free to jump in and let us know where you're joining from. There's also a docs section where you've got some information that's available to you in addition to a webinar that's actually occurring later this week. And then we've got our Q&A section that's specific for questions that are coming up as we're kind of presenting. So let's keep questions isolated to the Q&A tab. If you forget, that's fine. We can push them over from the chat. But chat is really just there to just communicate back and forth if you don't have a question. With that being said, let me go ahead and share my screen here and actually jump in to what LaunchDarkly is. So again, Nicole Dojero, solutions engineer here at LaunchDarkly. Previous to this, have spent some time working on support teams and as a solution engineer at other companies. In my former life, I was a high school science teacher. So I've kind of a non-traditional path and kind of have been all over the place here. But that's a little bit about me. So wanted to jump in and really quickly just set the stage and really just spend 5 minutes talking about 3 basic things. What's an overview of LaunchDarkly and how we fit into the SDLC, the basics of a feature flag, and what the concept of a dark launch actually is. What does this name come from, LaunchDarkly? And how you can actually target on those feature flags. Those are essential concepts that are going to come up throughout the webinar. And so I wanted to make sure that we kind of had something to hang our hat on there and make sure that we understood where we were coming from. So just a quick overview. So CI/CD gets you to production. LaunchDarkly is going to give you control once you're there. So we're really helping you decouple deployment from the release process. So I don't have to worry if a feature is ready to be in front of my customer's eyeballs. I can wrap it into feature flag, and as long as that's turned off, I can deploy code as often as I need to without worrying about breaking anything, right? And so what LaunchDarkly really does within feature management is help you answer questions like, when are we going to release? To whom are we going to release? How quickly is that release going to take place? And is that release actually leading to the behavior that we're wanting to see in our customers? And also, what's happening under the hood as this release is taking place? Is there any kind of regression occurring? Those are the kinds of questions that we help you answer. This is just scratching the surface. And honestly, the entire webinar really only scratches the surface in terms of what we provide. And we're really expanded and acquired a couple of companies, one being an observability tool and one being a product analytics tool. So if what we're talking about today, you want to know more, you want to dig into more deeply to any of our other offerings, absolutely reach out and we're more than happy to jump in and do a deep dive and show you the art of the possible, right? But that being said, let's talk about just a basic feature flag, not a new concept, but just want to make sure we're all on the same page. It's just a decision point in your code that's taking a certain condition into account and saying, all right, if this condition is met, let's give this experience. Otherwise, let's serve this other experience. So for example, let's say I want to have a certain experience for my gold customers and say, let's roll out that one-click checkout feature if this is a gold customer. If it's not a gold customer, let's give them the old feature. So giving you that control over who is seeing what and when is just the basic concept of a feature flag. And that really brings into account one of the huge value adds of LaunchDarkly, in that you're able to target by using these feature flags by building what we call a context object. And a context is really going to be as granular or general as you want it to be in terms of what makes sense for information that would target based on. So for example, here, this is a multi-context, so I can chain these together and make them kind of as complicated as I need to, and do things like, hey, give me information about the device. Is the customer on iOS or Android? What version are they using? Give me some organizational information about, the plan that they have with my company. Give me user-specific information so I can be really specific and making sure that whoever is using my platform is seeing what they need to see in terms of, what they've purchased, who they are, what device they're signing in from, etc. And additionally, you're able to do things on top of that. So I'm reducing the blast radius, which you'll hear us say a lot, by targeting and making sure that I am serving experiences just for a certain subset of my population. But I can also go a little bit further and roll that out progressively. Start small and progressively roll that out to larger and larger increments of that population, or even group some of that targeting information together in what's called a segment, and then have, like, for example, an early adopter group where I can just have a segment where I'm rolling out to just that group. So those are the basics. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Aaron and let him share a screen and talk about how he's leveraged what we just talked about to really help Thrivent improve their release process. Aaron.
Thanks, Nicole. We'll share here. All right, so I'm here to talk about how, as a company, Thrivent has leveraged some of the feature management capabilities within LaunchDarkly, in particular feature flags, which is kind of the concept that Nicole had just briefly introduced there. And just to recap, my name is Aaron Ader. I'm a staff software engineer here at Thrivent. So for my portion of the presentation, I'm going to both highlight our partnership with LaunchDarkly and also discuss how we've used their capabilities, in particular feature flags, to both release more quickly and with less overall risk. First, a bit about us, because I realize not everyone's heard of Thrivent. We are a Fortune 500 financial services company. We put generosity at the heart of saving and investing. We're member-owned, founded more than a century ago when neighbors came together to insure each other. And today we serve over 2 million clients. Additionally, as far as what we offer, we help build, grow, and protect financial well-being through purpose-driven advice. We offer investments, insurance, banking, and generosity programs. And as far as what brings us here today, we are a LaunchDarkly customer. They have been our vendor partner for a little over 2 years now. We started working with them in around 2023. I lead one of the engineering teams responsible for building the financial planning tools that our advisors use when they're working with clients to better understand their financial picture and help them, recommend the products and services that are going to best fit them. The primary system that my team supports is called the Thrivent Planning Platform. This is a custom in-house built React application that surfaces a lot of the financial information that's going to help advisors in that decision making. Presents an overview of a client's financial plan and dives a little deeper into specific aspects of financial planning. So you can think of retirement planning, for example. This was released to advisors back in January of 2024 to largely critical acclaim and has been receiving a fairly steady stream of feature development ever since then. And that leads into one of the challenges that you have when you are building out a system at such a fast pace, right? when you're introducing new features. We have many new features that are being planned every quarter by our product management teams, which means that at any given time, multiple of these features are going to be actively in development at once in different phases of development. Some of these features are going to be very quick to deliver to production. Others might be more involved. They might be requiring coordination with other teams and may span several months before they're truly ready to be in front of our live user audience. So a natural question comes up: how do you control when you release a particular feature to our end users? Ideally, when a feature is done and ready to be released, we'd like to release that feature and only that feature to our advisors. Now, there are ways of doing this through various branching strategies, but that gets very complicated very quickly. The more and more features you have, when you only have one or two, you perhaps could get away with juggling different feature branches, but it gets very complex. And also being able to know like which features are available in each environment. There's not a clear answer to that. So we turned to feature flags as a technology, and our chosen partner was LaunchDarkly. Again, we began working with them in 2023. So I'd like to talk about how this affected the way we deliver software. How did it impact our software development lifecycle? Before beginning development, where we begin now is creating a flag through the LaunchDarkly dashboard, which I believe Nicole will show during her demo. But we'll create a flag there for the feature that we're looking to implement. During development, we will then leverage one of the LaunchDarkly software development kits that are made available, which will allow you to easily integrate with LaunchDarkly and pull in those flags so that you can reference them within your application. We primarily deal with React as a front-end technology, so we have used the LaunchDarkly React SDK. And finally, once development is complete and we're ready for prime time, ready to release to our end users, there is a built-in approval process within LaunchDarkly to review changes to those feature flags before they're toggled in production. So we can get a review and approval by our team to make sure that it's released in the way that we would like. This also includes an integration with ServiceNow that's built into LaunchDarkly, which has been really beneficial for us because that's what we use for compliance and auditing with our ITSM policies here at Thrivent. Now, going back to that original challenge that I had brought up about having many features in development at once and being able to release those one at a time into production to have that fine-grained control, I'd like to revisit that question and talk about, well, how do feature flags really help solve that? And I know this is a concept that Nicole had just brought up earlier, but it's this idea of decoupling deployments for releases. The way that we approach development at Thrivent is very much a trunk-based development model, where every time we make a code change, that'll take the form of a pull request, we will merge that into the main branch, and we treat our main branch as something that is production ready at all times. And if you didn't have feature flags, that'd be very challenging to have that sort of philosophy. But with LaunchDarkly, what we can do is if we have a part of a feature that isn't maybe quite ready for production yet, we can put that behind a feature flag, and that allows us to still merge it into the main branch to test that feature out in our lower test environments while keeping the feature turned off in production. That allows, therefore, to have a steady stream of deployments to production because the features that aren't yet ready are behind flags. And then when we are ready to release them, that's a separate process. It's really a business decision. When really our product managers are ready for a given feature to be placed in front of our users, an engineer logs into LaunchDarkly, goes through that approval process, and then the feature would become live. So decoupling deployments from releases is a huge advantage for using feature flags. There's a few other things we get out of. At the onset, I talked about how we can release faster and with less risk. So decoupling deployments from releases that I just talked about, that helps us release faster, but there's also this idea of reducing risk. So one aspect there is that when we deploy code to production that has a new feature, we can selectively control the audience that sees that feature. And like the most restrictive set of your user base could be just a single user. So you can think of maybe an ID that you have to validate your production environment. When you have a new feature that's behind a feature flag, you can turn it on for that ID and that ID only. So you can validate the functionality in production without any of your actual users seeing it. going a little bit broader, you can also enable targeted rollouts. So we've had a very common use case of having a pilot group of users that we would like to put a feature in front of them first for a couple reasons. One, to reduce that blast radius so that if there are issues with that feature, it's not in front of everybody. And also to gather feedback. That's a very meaningful mechanism that you get out of these more controlled and targeted rollouts, is that you can get feedback from those users and possibly implement that feedback, but also you don't have to, right? If from what you hear from that pilot group, everything is okay, you can then broaden it up, turn on the feature for everybody without needing to do a code deployment, which is definitely a huge win. So you can see there, you could start with a pilot group and then broaden it out once you've gone through those feedback cycles and confirm that everything is working as you'd expect it to. One last positive benefit that we've seen out of feature flags has been reduced coordination. I think it's fairly common, especially in larger organizations, that implementing new functionality may require coordination with other teams. So that could include infrastructure teams, possibly enterprise level teams that are building shared services, external vendors, and so on. When you're using feature management capabilities, you don't have to do that level of coordination. You don't have to all work together to do a big deployment all at nighttime or whenever you may agree to do it. You can have your feature behind that feature flag. It's sort of in a hibernated state, if you will. You can move that to production, and then once everybody's ready, then you can turn on your flag and have the coordination at that time rather than having it be at that deployment level. And then kind of just to summarize there, yeah, no need for a coordinated deployment time. Deploy your changes to production, then turn it on once everybody is ready. I do also want to highlight some of the, I don't want to consider them downsides, but more changes that we needed to account for, behavioral changes within the team as we adopted feature flags across the company. So one would be increased testing complexity. When you do introduce feature flags, it is more or less an if-else statement in the code, as Nicole showed. So you are going to want to make sure you're testing for that in your unit tests, in your integrated tests. Any sort of testing processes that you have in place today, you're going to want to make sure you are accounting for the flag being on and it being off. And also, if flags are interacting with each other, you're going to want to make sure you test those different combinations to make sure that there's no unexpected behaviors. And lastly, you're going to want to think about cleanup and maintenance of flags. Again, because it is an if-else statement in your code, you're going to want to be careful to manage how many of those you have going on at once. And at some point, once the feature is live to everybody, you really don't need that else statement in your code, right? So you should look at cleaning that up and removing any references to those flags. Launch Darkly does have built-in capabilities for detecting code references and understanding when flags are no longer being used, which that has been a huge help in identifying, when certain flags can be removed. But I will say this is largely a behavioral change within your team, that when you release new features to production, if they are behind feature flags, you will have to be able to get your team on board with the idea that just because you release to a full audience doesn't necessarily mean that all the work is done. There is that cleanup that has to take place at the very end. So with that, that's everything I had. I believe I will hand it back over to Nicole to do a demo of the Launch Darkly platform.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Let me share my screen again. Okay, so how do we do what Aaron was just talking about? So we're going to stick with the bank theme here, and let's say we're all now developers for the Toggle Bank application. Congratulations, you're hired. And let's say we've been working on a wealth management component that we have dark launched. So we've pushed that code into production, not visible yet because we haven't released it because this flag is not on. So when it comes time to make that business decision that, hey, we're actually ready to roll this out, we can come over here and toggle this on. Full disclosure, anything that I'm doing in the UI, you can do via API call as well. So you can definitely automate this, but the flexibility there to be able to have non-technical users come in and toggle the flag is a huge value add too. So once I toggle that flag on, within 200 milliseconds, boom, the intended experience is in front of my customer. Now, to kind of confront an uncomfortable truth, no matter how much we try to replicate our production environments and our testing environments, it's never quite going to be apples to apples. So as much as we may not want to think about it, we're always kind of testing in production. So when things go wrong, you really can roll back just as quickly as you were able to roll out. And that is the basics of a feature release. So that's the, win of how we release a feature. But I also said that LaunchDarkly helps you address that to whom piece. So what I did right there was really what we call a big bang release. So I released that feature to my entire customer base, and then who knows who saw that error. It could be 2 people, it could be 200, 2,000, who knows, depends on the feature, right? So if I wanted to be a little bit more strategic, I could reduce that blast radius and target like an early access group, like Aaron was talking about, where I can come in and target a segment and say, hey, let me target my beta users. They've opted in for this experience and they're going to, give us their feedback, and let's hide that for everyone else. And once I've done that targeting and I do that feature rollout, I have myself safeguarded. Right now, I'm logged in as a standard user. So notice my experience didn't change. But if I come over here and log in as a beta user, that experience is available. But it doesn't have to stop there. So I can reduce the blast radius even further and say, maybe I don't want to roll out to this entire segment all at once, and I want to be a little bit more methodical and progressively roll that out. So this is the how long statement, right? Or the question, right? Where we're really seeing, all right, we've got a subsection of our users, but let's roll that out. Let's start small and increasingly roll that out to a larger population of those beta users. Maybe I don't want to make them mad so that they don't opt into being a beta user anymore, right? And this can really be kind of as fast or slow as you need it to be. This is configurable. So I'm curious here, Aaron's still on the stage with me. So I'm curious, so when you were talking about your rollouts with Thrivent, it seemed like all of these were mainly are those big bang releases where you're really rolling out to a segment, but the whole segment at once. So I'm curious, knowing that this capability exists, and I understand you may not be able to get into specifics, but have there been instances where a rollback was needed where, man, it really would have been convenient to have that in front of fewer eyeballs before we actually rolled that back?
Sure. Yeah, this is a really exciting offering within the LaunchDarkly platform. For the most part, yes, we do the sort of big bang releases as you've described them, where it's either to our entire field of financial advisors or perhaps that pilot group. But even then, that's a few hundred people that are going to have eyes on it. So I can definitely see the value here where, if things go right, it's great. But when things go wrong, if you find behavior in production that maybe you weren't expecting, because I agree, test environments aren't always going to be one-for-one for production, no matter how much you try. To have the impact be, significantly minimized here, so that it's maybe just 10% or 20% or what have you. I think that's huge. That's less phone calls we're receiving. If it's a pilot group, it's not as big of a deal because they're kind of expecting some level of instability or issues. But when we are releasing it to kind of the full audience to start with, I think this is a game changer. Being able to again minimize that impact and have that visibility into how many users are affected, and to be able to have that fine grained control to kind of roll it out progressively versus all at once. You can kind of ramp it up, right? If things are looking good to get to that full 100%, but not necessarily having it happen, all at once. So. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, that's what I thought, but I'm glad to hear that you agree. So curious, you talk about releasing to early access users and really relying on their feedback. So that's how you're getting that feedback loop there. But as you're releasing other features, what are you doing? And again, it's totally fine if you can't give us, a lot of detail, but how are you kind of monitoring the health of those releases as they're in flight?
Right. So we have a few mechanisms. The big one would be we do have an observability platform in place within Thrivent where we can gather detailed metrics about our application as it's being used in real time. So we're not relying on people to call into, a support desk and log an issue. That's certainly one means for identifying problems, but a more proactive way is to receive, that insight through an observability tool, and measure things like API call failure rates and latency, with the application, and being able to map that back to, oh, hey, we just released a new feature through a feature flag, and that might be what's causing that behavior. So yeah, that's generally how we've been getting those insights. Granted, it's an external tool outside of LaunchDarkly, but between that and responding to any incidents that may be raised by actual users, those are the primary means we have for identifying any problems in production.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. And that's pretty, I'd say industry standard. Like most customers that I talk to are doing something similar. Definitely, good to have observability in place so that you're not just relying on customer feedback for sure, because that's the lag time there is huge. But there is a concern, I think, with that inherent in that. So with an APM tool, we're really looking at the stratospheric level, the entire lay of the land. And when I'm talking about specific features and I'm looking at, I've already kind of created a subsection of my users that I'm rolling this feature out to. And then if I'm doing a progressive rollout, it's a subsection of a subsection, right? So what could be a spike in terms of this feature, maybe a couple of pixels on a dashboard somewhere, right? So I might not know until the problem gets bad. So that's where the power of a guarded release comes in, where you are actually building on top of this concept of a progressive rollout and tying metrics specific to that feature as that's actually being rolled out. So let's look at what that looks like. So here's an example of a guarded release that's already been completed and rolled back. So what I did here, we're rolling out to a new API endpoint. And let's say I want to look at API latency and API error rates, right? I've got a little bit of control there, and I can kind of define, like, maybe I can be a little bit more tolerant of latency, but definitely not tolerant of an error rate. You have some configurability there. But essentially what's happening is a very opinionated A/B test where we're protecting against a worse experience. So as that progressive rollout is underway, I'm looking at those metrics in terms of my current state, and then I'm looking at the future state that I'm rolling out to, and I'm comparing those metrics to each other. And then there's some Bayesian statistics that's going on under the hood to account for small sample sizes to say, hey, this is a worse experience. It's statistically significant. And then I have two options. I can either be alerted and then come in and triage and figure out what I want my next steps to be, or I can actually safeguard this release and have it set to automatically roll back so that I'm not being pulled out of my work for a fire drill. When we're doing a release, I'm not, having to be shackled to a war room where I'm monitoring everything in real time. And I'm also maybe not even being pulled out of bed in the middle of the night because I'm on call, right? So whereas an APM tool is really telling us, hey, maybe there is a volcanic eruption that is currently underway, right? This is really like a seismometer that's tied to the specific feature that says there are some rumblings here that are going to become an issue if this continues, right? So just another level of safeguarding there. So I'm curious, you were excited about a progressive release, but being able to tie specific metrics to that progressive release, how could that change maybe your time to detection and time to recovery?
Yeah, I think the big difference here is being able to map those issues and impacts that we're seeing by our end users to rollouts of a particular feature flag. That's kind of a gap we have today, right? Because we're managing the feature lifecycle within LaunchDarkly, but then we have an external tool, an external observability platform that, yes, can monitor our environment and alert us to anomalies that we're seeing, but there's not a great correlation between the two. Oftentimes, as we're releasing new features, we're normally only doing one at a time, and as long as we have enough insight into what the feature is doing, we can more or less map it back to what we're seeing in that observability platform. But it's not a perfect science, and if you start introducing and more rapidly rolling out new features, that gets increasingly complex to be able to say, hey, I released 5 features this week, which one is causing the particular issue that we're seeing in production? That's very difficult when it's externalized. So I think that's one of the big draws that I'm seeing to these guarded releases, and also having that capability to do an auto backout, I think is great. So you're not having, engineers getting pulled out of their day-to-day routine, or if you're doing nighttime deployments, not getting woken up in the middle of the night to do a rollback. I think that's a huge win for engineering teams.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing, I think that we don't take into account as often as maybe we should is, when you're in a flow state and you're ripped out of that flow state, it takes you 20 minutes to kind of get your bearings and figure out what you're doing next. When I'm getting ripped out to go do a fire drill and figure out and troubleshoot and roll back and what have you. And then it's going to be another 20 minutes when I come back to what I was working on to actually get that efficiency back up. So to be able to remove that piece, I think is huge. And then, when you talk about losing sleep, that's a whole nother level, right? So yeah, really, we're not just talking about improving customer experience. It's absolutely doing that, right? Safeguarding against any kind of, a bad experience, where we're really making sure that whatever is the most optimal experience we have to offer is what we're serving customers. But it also, I think, improves our, on our side, it improves our experience as well, right? An additional piece that I think is really exciting and worth mentioning. So I did mention that we acquired highlight.io, which is an observability tool. So we're in the process of kind of grading that functionality, even though if you notice over here, we do have some standalone observability that's available, but we're braiding that functionality into these core features so that, eventually you'll be able to say, hey, these 45 users that saw this regression, let me see a session replay. Let me see traces, errors, logs, so that troubleshooting piece, and as somebody who used to work on a support team, kind of almost makes me tear up a little bit, thinking about the amount of hours, you see a spike, and then you've got the task of spelunking through the caves of your architecture to figure out what timed out and when, and then for who is usually a mystery, right? Good luck getting that information. So having all of that feature specific, context specific, session information baked into this, I think, is just a whole nother level for risk mitigation, right? And time to recovery. A common question that I see that I anticipate, people are probably wondering, where do these metrics come from? You've got some options there, and we can definitely follow up with documentation on those. You can do things like tie into Sentry, open telemetry. You can hand instrument these metrics, which sounds a lot more complicated than it is. It's really just collecting those metrics on the application side and associating it with an identifier, having that identifier on the LaunchDarkly side and saying, hey, this number means this thing, tie it to your feature, you're done, right? But because we have that observability SDK now, if you instrument that, you've also got some out-of-the-box metrics that are auto-generated, where you can get web vitals, errors, document load times, those kinds of things. So lots of different entry points, kind of depending on what your needs are, just to call that out. But I see somebody's asking a question in the chat that actually reminds me that I wanted to touch on this piece. So managing the flag life cycles, and that is a question that comes up a lot when talking to prospective and current customers of LaunchDarkly. So a few things that I wanted to touch on. Aaron mentioned we do have the ability to integrate with your code bases with code references. So I can check and see, is this flag being used anywhere? And if so, where? We also have some automation going on under the hood where we're automatically tagging flags that seem like good candidates for deprecation. So here I'm checking to see, all right, there's no code references, no one's coming into contact with it. It's not a prerequisite with other flags because you can actually tie flags together as dependencies. If I have a front-end component that's relying on a back-end component being deployed, I don't want that to be able to roll out until the back-end is deployed, right? So that was what we mean by prerequisites there. So we're doing some of that under the hood to flag those for you. But additionally, we've got our release management pipelines part of the platform where you can actually have multiple pipelines and define lifecycle stages for the flags, right? Where I say every flag kind of has to go through this testing phase, then maybe it gets promoted to a guarded release. Once it's in this GA column, that's a sign for me to go in and see, okay, which one of these are ready to be deprecated. And then once it's fully released, been deprecated, it'll kind of populate over here in this right-hand column. And this is configurable. But to Aaron's point, there is a behavioral piece. This is a great tool, but without being intentional about the behavioral shift that comes with approaching releases in this way, it can go by the wayside. And so to make sure that that doesn't happen, if you need help, our professional services team are actually experts at doing exactly that, coming in, whiteboarding with you and saying, all right, what are our non-negotiables in terms of what we absolutely have to avoid? What are we looking to get out of this? What stages make sense in terms of our organization? And then helping you draft kind of a center of excellence charter and roll that behavioral out. Because again, I mentioned I was a high school science teacher. With a behavioral change, you have to be explicit, you have to be intentional, you have to say it more times than you think you're going to need to say it. And we can really help with that piece too. So just wanted to mention that as well. But seems like we're starting to kind of come up on time here. This has flown by. So I wanted to see, in the time that we have remaining, what questions do we have? Happy to jump in, answer questions, show you things that look interesting in the time that we have remaining. And if there's no questions, I'm happy to kind of jump into and maybe show how to set up a guarded release as well, if that sounds. If we don't have any questions here in the next 30 seconds or so, that's probably what I'll do. Okay, I'm doing it. All right, so setting up a guarded release, what does that look like? So coming in and actually configuring a guarded rollout looks very similar to having a progressive rollout, right? So I've got to select my rollout duration. I've got some canned time increments here, but I can also have custom time increments and configure that myself. Once I've got metrics piped into LaunchDarkly in any of the ways that I kind of described before, those will auto-populate here in the dropdown as potential metrics that I can tie to this release. So if I'm doing what I did earlier, I can tie error rates, I can tie latency, I target based on how I want to target. And then these percentages here, what do these mean? So if I say, maybe for latency, I can be a little bit more tolerant. Maybe I'm okay with it being 25% worse than our current state. But error rates, let's say, nope, can't be tolerant of those. And let's automatically roll back on just that metric. So you have that configurability there. It's not going to automatically roll back on everything if I set it to automatically roll back on one thing. And then I can set it and forget it. If it hits the point in that rollout duration, like here I've selected 24 hours, if 24 hours passes and not enough users have actually interacted with the feature to have enough information to make a call either way, it'll automatically extend that. And it kind of does that indefinitely until it's got enough information there. So that piece you don't have to worry about. But we integrate with all of the major collaboration tools. So whatever you're spending, if you spend most of your time in Slack or Teams and you don't want to be shackled to the LaunchDarkly dashboard, monitoring these things as they're being rolled out, you can have it set up to automatically alert you. In addition to other things, like if you want to set up an approval flow, you can have that populate into Slack as well. Or kind of like we were showing the tags earlier. Let's say I want to set up a channel that's just for flags ready to deprecate. And then as those tags get marked on individual flags, I can have those auto-populate into Slack or Teams too, so that I know these are good candidates to be able to see if I need to deprecate them. But that being said, this is really, the LaunchDarkly platform in a nutshell. Things that we didn't talk about today. You have the option to do some LLM config management, so you can actually manage the actual models that you're using and the prompts at runtime, so you're not having to redeploy if you work with LLMs. We also have a robust experimentation platform where you can go in and actually make sure that you have data behind the decisions that you need for your roadmap. We also have those observability and product analytics in place. So again, if any of that sounds like something that you would love to dig more into, happy to schedule time and dig in and show you kind of what we have. Thanks so much for joining. You can have a little bit of time back in your day, but thanks for spending part of your day with us.